So anyway, guys, we got about 3 minutes till the show starts, so we're doing a little pre-show chitter chatter here. So anyway, Frank, thanks again for agreeing to do this and everything. How are things over where you're at? You doing all right?
It's Georgia. I mean, it's, we don't really have storms. The weather's, fairly temperate.
Yeah, it's been back and forth over here. It's been cold, hot.
Where are you?
I'm in Florida, the Pensacola area.
Yeah, basically the same, except more humid and hurricane risk.
Yeah, we've had to deal with those. Those have been a pain.
Oh yeah.
What part of Georgia are you in?
I'm north of Atlanta, so technically Peachtree Corners, because apparently that's the thing around here.
Have you ever heard of Franklin, North Carolina? That's like where I'm from.
Oh, okay. I've been through there. It's been a while.
Yeah, we go through Atlanta a lot when we're traveling up there.
Oh, totally, yeah.
I've never been a fan of the traffic over there. It's just a nightmare.
Yeah. Although it's not too bad at the moment. I mean, for once you can actually get places.
Yeah,
it will never happen again.
Yeah, I think I went through Atlanta one time, and I remember it was night, and both the main road was blocked because there was an accident, and then 285 was blocked because there was an accident. So it was just, so I'm just driving through like these towns I've never heard of before, just trying to get around two of these things. So you've probably experienced that.
Yeah, there was a time during the 70s when they were just like trying to fix everything, and it took
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I remember. I think they have. Is it an 8-lane going through Atlanta? And if they have like construction going on. I mean, it's bad enough just when there's even 8 lanes. But
it was like decades of construction. Yeah.
I think that was the state flower for a little while. Was those construction? You saw so many of them.
Hey, we got a state mammal that's a bat. So there.
Yeah. And there is a place in North Carolina. You may have been to it. It's called Bat Cave, North Carolina.
No, I haven't. I need to add it to the list.
I don't know if there's an actual bat cave there. I would imagine there is.
I wouldn't want to go in it because bats, dangerous environments. Don't really want to mess with the bats' home.
Yeah, I wouldn't either.
Okay.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and get ready, guys. This is Norm from the Board Game Museum, everybody. It is good to see you guys here. I have got Frank Branham with me. He is a game designer. He's written several articles on board games, and he ran a site called the Gaming Dumpster a long time ago, which was basically a place where you would translate rules that were in different languages like German. And he is a member of a podcast website called Ascent for Board Games. And here is Frank. So, Frank, how are you doing today?
Hi. I'm doing okay. I mean, glad to be here. Glad to talk about games, which is pretty much my obsession.
I understand. And you told me the number of games you have in your collection. How many do you have now?
I don't know. It's kind of weird. I think it's around 3,000, maybe. At one point, I had a better count, and it was north of 3,500. But then I sold off like 1,500 games when we moved into this house. Kind of weird to fill an entire truckload full of games and just send them off, but there was a pretty heavy culling there.
Where do you have them at? Do you have them all in one room, or how do you situate 3,000 games?
There's basically those Home Depot cheap plastic laundry shelves. There are A through I think U. And basically, the shelves are given shelf tags. So if you look, there's an MR3, which would be books or laundry shelf M, right side, third shelf up, and those go in a database. We use Gamepedia, which is a Mac-centric, database, which supports board game key lookup. So we can fill in all the details of the game. So you just put in the name of the game, shelf assignment, and stick a tag on it so we know where to put it back. With that many games, before that, you could never find anything.
Yeah, that would be like the Dewey Decimal System in the library.
That's all my wife's fault. She's got some weird form of organization, OCD.
Mm-hmm.
The story there is she actually got kind of laid off of a job that she where her company is downsizing. And so I was telling basically or actually she was a little upset at her company. I can't remember the details of that. But I worked at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution at the time and was talking to the news research, some of the folks I knew at News Research, and describing, her taking time while she was off to database the games, organize them. And he was like, "Oh, we need her. let me see what we've got for a position." And she, went in, got the job, no problem.
That's great. I know we have about 500 here at the house, and people here think that that's a large amount. But when you think 1,000, 4,000 games, I'm like, I can't even picture that many.
Oh, it's not too bad. The worst case I know are James and Sheila Davis, who are a couple who live in Colorado. They're maybe 20,000 plus. They have no clue anymore. And there are games in every room in the house. They're both avid gamers and both rabid acquirers. It goes beyond collection. It's just kind of
kind of like, I guess, a hoarder's thing, huh? Like they just hoard board games.
No, well, they don't keep multiple copies and stuff, and they do call occasionally, but it just happens.
Oh yeah, well, that's kind of what's happened here. We've had to sell off a lot of them. So let's start with the beginnings. When you were like growing up, did you have any favorite games that you began playing that you can remember?
I mean, I do know my first game was Winnie the Pooh. My parents, my father's family were avid gamers. They had 10 or 12 board games growing up, which for the 50s, 60s is kind of unusual. Both me and my cousin, may have had 70 or 80 games growing up, which is really unusual. We're talking 70s. And a lot of childhood classics. I always liked Witch a lot. Battle Board, which is an old kind of old chessy game where you have a big air bellows and you slam it down, causing pieces to pop out the other side. The game we played most was Rook. We're Georgia, Tennessee.
And Rook's a fun game.
Everyone played Rook.
So when was this? Like in the early 70s?
Yeah, pretty much. Early 70s, I swear. They taught me Rook pretty much as soon as I could hold cards. I think it was maybe 4 when Winnie the Pooh showed up. And then there would be 3 or 4 games every Christmas, birthdays. Periodically, we'd come across something I grew up in Kentucky, so it was pretty much Big K and Roses, those discount stores that are long gone.
Mm-hmm.
And some games showed up. Let's see. I think other favorites would be Pegs, which is an old abstract Parker Brothers game. Electronic. Basically, you had a bunch of pegs. And you put them in, when you put a peg in each side, it'd make a noise. And it came with like a dozen pretty nice little abstract strategy games that you played hidden.
Yeah. I know that you had said when you sent in the email that you had collected Euro games really early on. What were some of the ones that you enjoyed playing, like when you first got into collecting the Euro games?
Yeah, I mean, this was pre-Settlers of Catan. I was a big fan of modern art, which I think was the first game I really seriously sought out. I was also a big fan of Elfin Roads, which was the predecessor to Elfinland. What really got me started was basically the Rec Games board on Usenet. If anyone knows what that is, you can, cheer or something. It's pretty much where games got discussed at the time. And someone posted that there was this company called White Wind that was an American who was publishing games in Germany, and he was selling copies, and the game was great. So I just bought all the games I could from Alan. And he invited me to gathering friends just on a whim, even though he'd never met me. Mostly because I just, oh yeah, I'll buy that. And got more, heavily pulled into kind of the German board game community. Some of the old Gold Zebra games, they're really a brand mark that's not around anymore. And they had some lovely games. Let's see, the original Metro. Obviously Settlers when that came around. But what I found is I've been playing, large war game as well as complex American hobby games that would take 3 to 4 hours. And of course, at that time, the classic German games were kind of lightweight. The rules were simple, extremely clear cut. And they'd play in an hour, if that. And like I said, Modern Art's a pretty serious auction game. Medici is another Reiner Knizia classic auction game that doesn't get the love it deserves.
Yeah. Well, here's a question I'm curious about. How have the European games evolved since you first started playing them, in your opinion?
Two directions, really. I mean, yeah. One is they got longer, more complex. There are rules holes. You have to ask questions, look at the fact. The games, there's some 3 to 4 hour long crawling Euros. And they got so complex that I started losing interest. I mean, and so I don't play the Lisboa. Wow, I'm trying to think of other examples that just I looked at horrified, ran away. Yokohama. And that 3 to 4 hour games, what I basically got away from with the European games. But at the same time, you got a trend toward more thematic adventure games that kind of play like the old American hobby games, but with a speed, cleverness. Cosmos is still doing those, but a lot of them don't make it to the US. There's a Star Wars game based on the Attack of the Clones that is amazing, but no, they only did in German.
Here's a question I'm curious about. Like when I first started collecting, I would go into thrift stores. That's kind of how it started with me and my wife. We played games a lot together.
Right.
How did it start with you when you started collecting games? What do you remember, like when you decided, you know what, I really like games, I'm going to just go ahead and start collecting them? Where did you usually go to find games? Did you just go to stores and do trades, or how did that work?
Yeah, so really, I think when I really started acquiring, I guess beyond, it'd be those hobby board games. There was a great bookstore in Atlanta called Oxford Books, and they had an Oxford too that dealt in used books. And so I'd drag up all the used books I could find and go trade them for game credit. They gave a lot of money for used books, which I led to their ultimate demise. And then they stocked, games. And these are some of the really classic West End, Tales of the Arabian Nights, Temple of the Beastmen, as well as some role-playing games that I've always been into. I think if you see the pictures I sent you, the last one is just my role-playing stuff. It's 2 big old bookshelves of what I have for role-playing, which also recently went through a cull of about 5 feet, I think.
Holy cow.
Yeah, I just measure that in feet because whatever, it's just a big bottom.
I do have your collection here. I'm gonna see if I can share the video.
It's kind of weird because you can't. The room's so crowded, I can't get an overview, but you can see just the laundry shelves. You can actually see the door where you can enter, but that's as far away as you can get from some of the games.
Yeah.
I've gotten into Kingdom Death. which is an amazing game. I've always liked miniatures and such, and there's a Kingdom Death hiding there. A bunch of smaller games. We've even got a number of boxes of just card games.
I saw, oh, I'm sorry. Let me see if I can pause this. I saw one picture. I was curious about. Well, I was curious about all of them. All these right here are all these different games.
That is the role-playing stuff.
The role-playing stuff. Okay.
So that's all books, little tiny 1-inch books, etc. Some old D&D box sets on top.
Yeah, that's very cool. We were talking a little earlier too, and I'm curious to see. I don't know how many people who are watching me know I've heard of this. Paragraph games. What exactly are paragraph games?
Yeah, and storybook games, whatever. So you have to cast your mind back to the 70s and 80s. When it started, there was a series of books in the UK called Fighting Fantasy. And that was kind of Ian Livingstone, Steve Jackson, the British Steve Jackson. There's also an American in Texas who's named Steve Jackson, the game, as a game designer. And the two, for some reason, get confused having the same name. But they wrote kind of these books that had, a little bit of rules. You would leaf through the books, make a choice, choose, go to paragraph 143 if you want to go left, go to paragraph 148 if you want to go right down the corridor. Yeah. And you roll, fight monsters, all that. That became the Choose Your Own Adventure books, and a whole series of Choose Your Own Adventure kind of games.
Now.
Yeah.
I was big into Choose Your Own Adventure when I was a kid. I remember those as well.
Oh, totally. But there was an early wave of kind of paragraph games that came out in the 80s. Started with Stainless Steel, Return of the Stainless Steel Rat, published by SPI. And some of the folks from SPI became West End and published the first edition of the classic Tales of the Arabian Nights, which is still one of the best of the paragraph games. Basically, you have a board, cards, you move around, you get experience for your character, and then you go to a gigantic book of 1,000 paragraphs to see what happened when you explore something. So it's kind of like having a giant card game where stuff happens and a real feel of like role-playing adventure. There were a few more adventure games in the 80s and stopped completely. I think the last gasp was the amazing Star Saga. We do have a whole episode. If you look at the podcast, we do a good tour of at least all of the paragraph games that we know. But with Kickstarter and that amazing renaissance, we've gotten stuff like Seventh Continent, Tainted Grail, and I can't even, I can't go to Kickstarter without, look, there's another, adventure game. It's cooperative and it has a gigantic 400-page storybook that comes with it. But those are all descended from that. I think I just got upstairs. No, I got the second Tainted Grail. I'm waiting on Sleeping Gods, which is a paragraph game. Solomon Kane, which will be another giant first wave of paragraph game. It probably has about 600 pages of storybook.
That's awesome.
So that's a thing, and yeah.
That is great. I was a Choose Your Own Adventure guy, and I think I remember that there was a game called Zork. It was a computer game. I think it was Zork or something like that.
It was absolutely Zork.
It was Zork. Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's very cool. All right.
There's a role-playing game called Parsley. Parsely that you should look at, and everyone should look at. It's kind of a role-playing game that's designed to be Zork with a game master. So your game master emulates a 2-word computer parser from the 80s. Mm-hmm. And yeah, you're totally go west, pick up bucket, fill bucket with water, fill bucket, and doing the whole Zork thing. And yeah, if you look at that, there's a book of I think it's about 15 different adventures with that kind of style.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I might do an episode on paragraph games and looking those up. Yeah, that's got my curiosity spun. Anyway, guys, we are with Frank Branham today, and I've got his website up here, the Ascent for Board Games. He is a game designer, and he's written articles, and he is a game historian of sorts. And here is the website. It is mainly podcasts. It's podcasts.
It's really a podcast. I mean, there's 5 of us. We only published monthly because we're old, busy. A couple of the other, or at least one of the guys, is a constant streamer. 2 of the others stream role-playing games. But we get together. The shtick for the podcast is that we pick kind of a mechanic or a thing, and then we try to go through the history, development, good examples of that thing. We started off with something easy to at least establish the format, which is deck building.
Yeah.
You see, there's this little game called Dominion that, if you're into games, that became a whole new mechanic, a trend, something that pretty much becomes a tag that gamers recognize. But we picked something like that. I think I'm threatening to do Roll and Move, but alas, I've never gotten quite enough traction.
Yeah, I was just looking, and you look like you guys like pick a topic and you talk about it, like racing games and things like that. And how often do you guys do the podcast?
Yeah, we publish once a month to keep it low. Part of it is we're 5 people, so just getting the horde together at one time. But also we try and fail sometimes, actually too much of the time, to get everyone to have at least some knowledge about the games we're discussing. One of my jobs my only job is to kind of go back and do some research on what the first of each kind of game, the first place that mechanism might have occurred. And that means going back to actual physical books. I do a pretty good sized library of old books on historical games of various types. And yeah, just trying to find those. Yeah, some of the deck building's easy, but the first racing game is probably not named. Since it would be pretty much Neolithic.
Gotcha.
Yeah, something with like pebbles and dots drawn in the sand.
Well, I'm gonna definitely post the link to the site here so people can listen to it, and they also have a Facebook page and Twitter and all those. I did get a couple of questions in here. There's a funny one. How often do you find looking at your collection?
Looking at it? Oh, it's down in the basement. The lights are currently off. At the moment, not at all, because COVID, no one comes over to play games. We're living off Board Game Arena, Tabletopia. We only have been shelving games about once every year. So what I didn't show is the gigantic row of shelves down this hallway that need to be shelved, or the games that need to be shelved, and all the Kickstarter stuff that my wife complains about me buying. But sadly, no. When I'm actually playing, once or twice a week, I'll go down, pull games, drag them upstairs into enough space where we can actually play.
Here's another one for you. What's the oldest game by date of publication that you have that you can remember, or a few of the oldest?
And I think that would be, I've got a copy of something called Heinrich van Loon's. I may have to look that up, which I think is from the 30s. Heinrich van Loon's Wide World or something, which I bought just because of its age and the Heinrich van Loon board game. The other truly great game is something called Ballaroo. Yeah. Which was 1936, the edition I have. It has these painted ping pong balls, and basically it's like a roulette party gambling game. And you've got a gigantic metal lead top that spins and knocks a big old Bakelite ball around to basically kill off the to kill off the ping pong balls and knock them off the golf tees. It's a huge old wooden. It looks like it was set up, the kind of thing you'd set up in a speakeasy or something.
Oh, here we go.
Like $20. I couldn't. I had to buy it.
Oh, let me ask this. Oh, here we go. Go here. How did you get started in publishing articles? Did you start like with a newspaper, or how did that start to come about?
I don't know. So, really, what happened? Bert. What was Bert's last name? He was a former editor for Games Magazine, the classic, board game reference and puzzle reference that from the 70s, 80s, which if you can find issues, some truly great puzzle designers came out of that. But also they wrote about board games really well. And Bert Hochberg, sounds right. And he began publishing, or he began basically when he retired from games, kind of started a website called the Games Cafe to just publish. And so I wrote some articles for it, helped him. And then his health wasn't so good, and he eventually closed it. But all the writers were really into the idea of writing it. So basically, Greg Aleknevicus and I fired up something called the Games Journal, which if you look at those links I sent you are from the Games Journal. So I'm still maintaining that site.
Oh,
and if you see the articles are like 2000, 2001. I don't think anything's been posted since like 2009 or something. But some of the articles there are great. If you look, there's an article about if you start poking around the site. It's all static HTML, so it survived every kind of basically web apocalypse we can imagine.
I did get one. I got one page up here, and this is part of what you said that you did, is that you design games, and here's one called the Groovy Prototypes. This were some games that you had worked on. This is a long time ago, this is the gamesjournal.com and just some designs that you had worked on. Did you ever get to selling any games?
Yeah, so I do have a few games. I'm trying to think. Dia de los Muertos actually got 2 editions. The original small print we made about 1,000, and then it was we reworked it as Four Dragons, which was published by Jolly Rogers in I think 2006, 2007. If you look, it's still on Board Game Geek under that name. It sold out a long time ago. If you look from that Groovy Prototypes, the Aquarium Derby was retitled to Warhamster Rally and got published. Elephant Polo ultimately sucked. And sadly, Witches Brew Arcane Arcanissima, I went back and played it, and it would have been awesome in the 90s, but it just didn't hold up. So yeah, that one's pretty much just sitting on a shelf in the back.
Are you have you got any games that you're working on now?
Nah, not really. I mean, getting older, and with so many games coming out, I don't feel a need to. In my case, the reason to publish a game was always just kind of something. During that time period, I was traveling a fair bit for work, and so I'm sitting there in a hotel room and yay, bored out of my skull. So design games. Of course, there's not really an internet thing then. We're talking about the 90s. So, but now I'm happy, content, and Kickstarter's feeding me with enough games that I don't feel compelled to make anymore.
What are some of your favorite Kickstarters? And the Kickstarters is something that has been going on for a little while now.
Yeah.
What are some of your favorites?
Yeah, I'm a serious addict. I think the best Kickstarter, my favorite, has got to be a game called Escape the Dark Castle. That feels like an old game, really. It's a stupid game too. It's almost, or kind of like, a Hero Quest meets some kind of dark gothic horror, Candyland. Basically, you go through, and it has that kind of choose your own paragraph thing. Basically, you have a huge deck of gigantic, oversized, even larger than tarot cards, and you make a deck out of at least with all the expansions, the game probably has 300 story cards or something, and you pull 15 out of a 15, with this gorgeous black and white, um, kind of rough and scary looking art, and you basically pull a card and you see if it's a monster to fight, some kind of choice, some kind of horrible die roll, and you try to make it through the deck, and you don't.
Yeah.
We finally got it to where we can win some of the time pretty reasonably, but it took us about 3 or 4 months before we won. And the game also comes with, an extra add-on, which is essential, which is basically a book that tells you exactly in detail how you died, and there's a page on it for each card.
Mm-hmm.
We consider that essential, but it's kind of a gleeful throwback to that old, fighting fantasy stuff.
Here's a question: do you ever play Cthulhu Wars?
Cthulhu Wars? Oh yeah, that's a good game. And if you looked at that role-playing shelf, there's about a shelf and a half of Call of Cthulhu. So a big Sandy Peterson fan. And yeah, I have Cthulhu Wars in probably about the first or second wave before. I don't think I got any of the third wave. But yeah, it's a really good game. It improves on an old game called Blood Wars, which is another favorite game. I think Cthulhu Wars is tighter, faster, easier to play, and kind of more fun. Yeah, I don't know. Have you played it or?
I haven't played it yet. I played the Munchkin, but I'll have to check out Cthulhu Wars soon. Here's a little question: are there some things in the older games that you like that you don't really see in today's games anymore? And like a 3D board, I always bring that one up. Like for example, can you think of anything about like some of the older games that really maybe not see today that you might find charming or just really enjoy?
Let me think. There's so many awful, crappy rolling moves when you go back through this. I mean, that's 80% of every game, and why people hate old games and licensed games. But for every one of those, there's one that's just amazing, that's old and you've never heard of it. If anything, it's the simplicity. And a lot of those games have rules you can explain in about 2 minutes. One of the ones I've got behind me for show and tell. Have you ever heard of Astron?
I have not, but please feel free to tell me about it.
I can't believe it.
You have it?
Astron. Okay. So, and I'm gonna kind of hand this down. So this would be the game that moves as you play. And this is actually a really good game.
Wow.
Look at Parker Brothers, 1955.
From the
So, the rules are, okay, I can deal with that pretty quickly. Basically what you've got is the absolutely awesome scrolling Astron board. So what this does is you have your figures just kind of sitting on the board, and you have a bunch of action cards which say things like move 3 sideways. You have a cat that's going to screw up my cables. So you would move 3 sideways and then move the map forward 2 spaces, which would be, that was the end of our game. But you end up using, this is a gigantic, like 12-foot paper map.
That is cool.
And you end up scrolling the map. So not only when you move the plane, you're also moving the map for everyone. And if anyone lands on an airport, they get, a cute little airport scoring card. plus points.
Oh,
If they land
cool.
on a hazard, which is all this, they lose points. And that's pretty much the game.
That's really cool.
Oh, yeah.
That's a great idea. I know I have the concentration game uses that. Yeah, I've never seen.
Oh, what's the concentration? Really? What's the concentration game?
Yeah, that's very cool. I saw you had brought out some other games. What else did you have out there for the system?
So back in here, because we actually play this a lot, and it'll come out, when there are people here. It plays up to 6. Let's see. The Ulster Insult is over here. This was actually a Spiel des Jahres nominee. Alex Randolph and Leo Colavini are designers. Alex Randolph grew up in America, and Leo Colavini is Italian. This was also only published in Germany. And you've got a big old giant board.
Wow.
And so one thing about German games, when you get to this time period, these are games made for families. So the rules are simple enough that you can teach them to your kids. But the games still require some thought. Of course, this game has Moai.
Holy cow.
Oh, yeah. Here we go.
Look at that.
Yeah, no.
I love this. That's one thing I love too is the sculpts that they put, or the components that they made. They're so detailed.
Oh, yeah. And the Germans really got a lot of great, gorgeous games in this time period.
Wow.
But also, the way the game works is that, in fact, this is a bag of rocks. The game requires you have a bunch of cards, and you move you have a Moai that you want to win. But you then are required to put rocks in the heads of figures you don't move. Your choice again. And basically, of the first 2 Moai to cross the finish line, the heaviest one wins.
Huh.
This can be counting rocks or drag out the grand scale.
And what year was that one again?
This one would be, I think, early 90s, published by Blacks. Do you not say? Hang on now. I do not see the year. I think it's like 92.
Wow, very cool.
Yeah, but I don't actually see a year on it. But yeah, early 90s, maybe late 80s. I think about 92.
92.
Yeah. Let's see.
That's great.
When you got to Essen, and the world's largest game fair is actually at Essen, Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I think there's a bigger one in Austria. At Essen, so if someone mentioned Spiele or Essen, you basically get a gigantic halls and halls of games, and you get all the German toy games as well as all their hobby games. But you also get occasionally companies that'll produce something that's kind of handmade, and especially older, you would get before there were Kickstarters. You get these little companies that show up with something handmade.
Yeah.
And I do have a bunch of those. They were easy. The one thing is when I started collecting European games, it was easy to get because the mark was tanking versus the dollar.
Yeah.
And so, I could order huge boxes of German games for nothing.
Wow.
Sometimes I would just put games on because, wow, that sounds good, has an interesting title, but there's nothing on it, period. So Mario Mediterranean, you're looking at like a kind of a wooden box. This is all hand silk screened. So
Wow.
ditto for the vinyl rollout mat and the pieces. And there are a lot of counters. You get a marble turn block, just a big chunk of marble in the game.
Wow.
And actually, this one's one I love to play. Enough that I redesigned part of the rules, reworked it to make it a little more fun. And I bought it a second time to get the this nicer edition. Mostly, I think it's the wooden box, and I think there's some metal coins under here too. Oh yeah, and we got some metal coins.
Man, that's a beautiful game.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
But you're looking at a really tiny production. I think the original game might have had 250. This, who knows, maybe about 50 of these. And so there is a lot of those when you start looking at German games. Let's see. Another one I dragged out is Headquarter. I have a lot of games by a company called Theta, which is, if you look at this company, and they're doing, elaborate wooden, angle that a little better, elaborate wooden games. I think this is still my favorite and one I wish would be republished. Their games kind of, there's a German term called Spielkunst.
Yeah.
Getting it. I mean, and really these games go for that. But this is a good game. You play it kind of set up like this between two players is a giant wooden head. And then you end up placing blocks either on both sides or one side. And at the end of the game, you get points for having contiguous groups of blocks. And the pieces are all pulled out of a bag. And, these are big, chunky wooden. Yeah. And so the tactile charm of this game is just off the charts. But it's actually a really good, nice, simple 5-minute game for 2 players.
I'm mind blown just looking at this game.
I know, and you couldn't. How would you? They actually did a gigantic game in some kind of huge cast resin concrete stuff, which I think they only did about 50 of them. A friend of mine does have one. But he's also a friend who has 5 copies of Jati because he's crazy. Actually, he had 8 copies of Jati at one point.
Jati?
Jati's so 3M.
Yeah, that's that 3M game that they made a few hundred
copies or something, and it's unobtainium. And at one point, he had 8. If you look, there's an entire website devoted to people and their pictures of Jati, and he's on there because he's insane. And oddly enough, he's a game collector himself. He has a couple thousand games, lives about a mile from here.
I think I read in the email that you had some games also from France. Would you say France or French?
I'm French, France. I've got games from all sorts of places. At one point, I kept refusing to sell off any game that was the last game I had from that country. I've got one called Chase Your Neighbor from the Saudi Republic, which is a weird little game. I've got one or 2 games from Lithuania, which I've never played because they're only in Lithuanian. So one place, I don't know, have you ever been? There's, you know where Huntsville, Alabama is, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
And on the way to Huntsville, there's that unclaimed baggage place.
Huh.
Which, if you look at the unclaimed baggage place in Alabama, you'll immediately come up with a Google on it. Oh. And that place is awesome. I just want to go back there once a year for just to go. But it's basically what they do is they buy just unclaimed baggage, and then they sort through it, and they have a big store of stuff.
That's cool.
We were there, and there was just a big old stack of games from Lithuania that someone hadn't claimed and left in an airport. But in the same, they've got a little museum because they've got a Stradivarius that was unclaimed,
wow.
One of the Hoggle puppets from the old '80s Labyrinth movie. Pretty much the Hoggle puppets. I think they may have donated that finally to the Puppet Museum, Center for Puppetry Arts in Atlanta. But for a long time, there was just a really old, sad, ratty Hoggle there.
Wow. They actually had a Stradivarius at the
the Stradivarius is still there.
It's still there? Yeah. That I don't know how you could forget one of those. Those are expensive.
Yeah, really.
Wow. Oh, man. Let me see if I got any questions here. Here's a little question. Have you ever played, where is it?
Probably. Oh,
You probably have. It's what was it called? Something Turtles. I'm finding it. Glowing Turtle. No, that's the name. Sorry. That's the name of the person. Barbarian Prince.
oh wow. Yeah. And that was in, wow, it's been forever since I played it. That was a really nice old, it was an Ares game from SPI. I think Ares 5. And it was a multiplayer war game. It's really clever. You basically wrote down all your orders, kind of like diplomacy, but then the negotiation was always going to go bad. And sorry, that's Barbarian Kings. No, Barbarian Prince is another good example of a paragraph game. That would be Heritage Dwarf Star. It was a solitaire game in a tiny little box. And it's also, I think, the hardest paragraph game I've ever played. I have never won it, but I got a copy sometime back in the 80s and would play it a lot when I was, 80s, so probably 14, 15, and I never won. Man, I think I made it once to the lower part of the map and got close and just, but yeah, that's exactly a paragraph game if you're what you're thinking about. So good call. And one of the early ones too.
I was going to ask this too. Do you have any? Are there any older games you'd like to see reprinted? Like I know Restoration Games has been doing some of the older games like Stop Thief and Fireball Island, The Curse of Volcar. Are there any older ones you'd like to see reprinted one day?
I know occasionally I chat with Justin. We did have Rob Davio, who's the other person behind Restoration Games, on our podcast a couple of times.
Oh wow!
Simply because we adore him, we adore his games, we adore legacy games. We did a long episode on legacy games, and it's pretty much just a love letter to Rob Davio, I think. But there's a game called Die Schlachter deines Saurier, which is I would kill to have. Well, I've got one, but I think everyone else needs to have one. So it's designed by Stephen Baker, who designed HeroQuest, the UK only Space Crusade. I do have, lots of HeroQuest, the Space Crusade, Battle Masters, and all those games. Mm-hmm. And just slot your dinosaurs in one of those big boxes. But it's a game about little guys riding on giant dinosaur miniatures.
Yeah.
It was produced only in Germany. And it's a really good game. It's a game that comes out occasionally. And most of the people I've had play it want copies desperately.
Yeah.
And several of them, at least the ones I know who are really wanting copies, have found them. But it's getting harder.
Here's a question for you. I'll flash this up. Curious about the instruction translations. Do you speak multiple languages, or do you work with languages you barely know? Be a translate, or how did the translation of the instructions work for you?
Oh, basically Google Translate. My French is not bad. I can almost read French instructions. And French games are mean, by the way. I don't know why that is, but we kind of discovered that there's a trend toward, kind of some pretty mean games from France, which are awesome. So I love them and have a lot of French games. But it's mostly Google Translate. The worst of it is when I was doing most of my translation, we didn't have Google Translate. So we're having to struggle through these really old translation programs that ran on whatever creaky PC you had at the time that were so slow and had a tiny dictionary and spit out just hordes of crap that you had to work over by hand with a real dictionary. And then just once you had an idea how to play it, just rewrite. I did do translations for a company called Cafe Games, and Eurogames Descartes was the French company. And my name's on a few French games from those two companies. Trying to think of Vinci, which became Small World later on.
Mhm.
I did the second edition translation of that, which needed it because the first edition was a little clunky.
Let's see. I'm looking through. Very cool. Are there any games you're planning to get soon that you like to own?
Wow. Now, I think so I'm on a budget at the moment because of the Kickstarter hoard and in general and lack of space. And I am currently looking at getting Sleeping Gods as soon as that ships. It's a Kickstarter. It's by Ryan Lockhart. It is a paragraph game where you're cooperatively sailing a ship on a giant map book
Mm-hmm.
with a whole bunch of encounters. And if you've looked at it and you have an idea of that kind of game, you want it. I played the prologue for it that he did as a print and play, and it's really good. I think it's might be the best game he's ever done.
Mm.
So that's a really nice one. Um, Games I'm really jonesing for at the moment. There is it's all Kickstarters. Sorry, but
That's the thing right now.
oh well, I mean, and a lot of it is those big story games are too expensive to put in a box.
Yeah.
Gloomhaven went. Isaac Childress went through hell for trying to get Gloomhaven in. He took it to publishers and they're going, no one wants that. No one's going to pay $100 for that game. It's too big. You can't stock it. And yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Phenomenon now.
and more power to him because Gloomhaven
Mhm.
is amazing. And again, Gloomhaven kind of has that story thing with the branching adventures and narrative. I think it's a wonderful game.
Mhm.
So I think the big one that we all want on our podcast is Oathsworn Into the Deep Wood, and that one looks so good. It's a big co-op miniatures game with a storybook and an app that deals with the story that's voiced by one of the Game of Thrones actors. That handles. But aside from doing the whole paragraph thing, you're basically doing a kind of Witcher thing where you're investigating the monster, talking to people, getting an idea of what you're fighting, what kind of thing you're going to be fighting, prepping to get the right weapons and gear up and tailor it for the kind of thing you're going to be dealing with. And
Mm.
then after you do all this preparation, hunting, planning, you open a box
Yeah.
and you see what you're going to be fighting. There literally is a gigantic box that's optional that contains all the minis, each in its own sealed box that you can paint, but the idea is to just pop out the mini and go, oh crap, we're dead. We're just gonna die. It's all over. And I think that kind of legacy and what they're going for is great. Um, but I think if I'm buying a new game, it's
Mhm.
probably going to be new game that's not a Kickstarter. It'll be the latest Warhammer Quest that Games Workshop.
Yeah, I want to try Warhammer Quest one of these days. Someone was selling his original copy for a couple hundred. I didn't jump on it, and now it's gone up like to the stratosphere.
Yeah, I paid 60 for mine.
Here's a question for you.
Oh yeah, I bought it new.
Any suggestions for someone trying to get their game published? Uh,
Wow, Western version of Barbarian Prince. I mean, really, that kind of thing is a Kickstarter. I'm not honestly, you know, I hate to dime Zev out, but you can try WizKids. Um, One of the games I have published is Battle Beyond Space, which is published by Z-Man Games. Zev Schlesinger, awesome person, is really into paragraph games. He did the jaw-dropping second edition of Tales of the Arabian Night, including writing essentially half as many paragraphs as the original game had.
mhm.
Um, since oddly enough, he has a background as a as basically a screenwriter, or at least a couple screenwriter credits in his history. But yeah, he's a sucker for those. He might. Otherwise, you might just find one of the Kickstarter people that's kind of looking for that. See if you can find someone who's publishing that kind of game. There is a small company that's doing games that are kind of similar to the old Melee Wizard. If you remember Steve Jackson, go back to those little tiny meta games in tiny sleeves that cost $3. There were a series of those for Melee Wizard, and then all the little solo adventures for that. There are a couple companies that are doing basically those little tiny gamelets with a map, a tiny book, and counters. If I may throw it in the comments. I'll look and see if I can remember that game. I've got a few of theirs, and they might actually do it. If it's really like Barbarian Prince and has that format, that's totally the thing.
All right, cool. Thanks, Frank. Let me see here. I'm gonna go. I got your podcast up again. I'm gonna just show it again. This is Frank, and here's his website. He has a podcast page that he does, and I'll see if I can get it up here. What do you guys have any? I might have asked this already. Do you guys have any topics you're looking to do next? What they do, guys, is they'll pick a topic and they'll just talk about it. And how about and also who are the guys that you work with on the on the podcast?
Yeah, so if you bring up, I think there's an About Us somewhere. And we do look at the who we are. There we go.
There it is. Okay.
When you look at the hordes, Brian is a bass player, collector. I've known him for a couple decades at least. Indoctrinated him into the cult of paragraph games, teaching him Star Saga. He also does our editing, sound, and keeps us generally on tech and on topic, which is a problem. Brian's also a role-playing writer. He did a lot of stuff for Shadowrun and was it the colonial horror game whose name is probably further down? No, it's in the RPG links. Sorry. Jason's a younger, avid Kickstart enthusiast. And oh man, the weird part about they don't mention about Jason is, yeah, he's got a lot of games, a lot of Kickstarters, but he's also got an entire room, like almost a wing of his house, of Gundam.
Gundam.
Oh yeah, and they're Gundam minis and Star Trek and Star Wars minis. They're just, you go in shelves, you're afraid to breathe in there because so the Gundam stuff is like perfect shelves of glass. Everything's museum lit. Kind of weird. Yeah, Joe and Mike are kind of our podcast people. Joe, I think, is mostly streaming RPGs.
Okay.
And hates half of the games that I like, so we fight about all the time. We do agree on something. Mike is addicted to streaming, and I think he spent 2 years streaming Tetris Effect, which he finally stopped doing.
Let's see. I'm looking. See if there's any more questions here. Man, I'm so glad you got to join me, Frank. It's been great talking to you. Let's see. You said you had the haunted house game, and how did you come about that one? Did you get that guys? If you've not heard of it, it's like it's like a real expensive game, and I believe it's just like a stand-up haunted house with different rooms. Is that?
So I really don't want to drag it out to go get it.
You don't have to drag it out.
But what it is it's a kind of a simple roll and move. But it's got all these little traps and things that are activated by the pressure of your peg on this elaborate 3D board. It's got one of the great 3D boards. And I should point out, because Sandy will watch this and kill me if I don't point out that it's not mine, it's hers. She sought it out and bought it, and I had actually very little to do with it. That's what happens when you marry a goth and get into games and get her into games. Um, but one of the also awesome things about the game is the owl spinner. It has this elaborate plastic owl that hoots and then spins a dial to indicate how far you move.
Mm-hmm.
And it uses little bellows under that. It's a tiny little cardboard bellows to make the little owl sound. Ours actually works, which is scary because this is a 60s era game. So you're talking about 60 years old. But yeah, it's a basic little roll and move with little traps, kind of witch like, but infinitely more impressive production because of the full 3D sculpt on it house.
Yeah, there it is. That's a picture of it right there, I think, right?
I don't quite see it on the podcast, I don't think. Do I?
It might not have shown up. That's okay.
Oh, yeah.
Let's see here. I'll just show you guys. Let's see here. There it is. Yeah, right here. There it is.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so you can kind of see the tracks where you're kind of moving around on the outside, and there's little traps that'll open up with little spook images behind them or extra, don't move. And so the game is, but the production's gorgeous.
Oh yeah, production is amazing.
Yeah, Ideal kind of nailed the 60s for the best games. I've got Tiger Island that I don't think is playable by humans, but I love because it has a giant tiger that spins around the middle of the board and bops you on the head. Mystic Skull Game of Voodoo, where basically you got this weird little pot of voodoo and a spinning magnet under it that tells you what happens as you put pins in your little voodoo doll.
Oh my goodness, that is insane.
Oh yeah, those kind of 60s toy games are great. I think at least half of them are Sandy's.
Oh yeah, I'm going to be doing an ideal game search soon. Let's see. Here we go. Here's one question for you, and we'll wrap it up. Thanks again, Frank, for being here. Great pleasure. All right, Bernardo asks, are there any games you remember being crazy cheap in your early collecting years that have shot up now? Dark Tower, of course, is one I know. That
my Dark Tower still works, and it's from when I was a kid. So poor guy's too young.
Yeah,
that's the big problem. So yeah, I mean, it's totally cheap when I bought it, or was given it to. Actually, as a kid, given it as a Christmas present. A lot of the German games, there's a game called Black Vienna that's an incredibly unobtainable German game. I think I bought it for 2 marks, which means it's like $1.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, the games when I really started collecting that thing or that kind of thing were all the licensed roll and moves. So wow, Beatles Flip Your Wig must be worth $200 or something. And so a lot of these toy games that were bought for the play value or whatever, but weren't based on some real license, were throwaway. I mean, this was stuff you found for $10 on eBay. It wasn't until folks like y'all started, look at this, and especially Tabletop Island is wonderful.
Yeah.
What drew me onto that is a Japanese game. I do a lot of Japanese games as well, and he actually produced a sheet of stickers for it, so I can finally actually play, and a good description of how to play the game. I'd had it for 5 or 6 years, but it never really decided to sit down and translate it.
What's a really good Japanese or a couple of Japanese games that you would recommend if you can to us?
So the ones you can find, there's a company called Oink Games. You can actually buy them just at Barnes and Noble. They generally have a little shelf of Oink games or off Amazon. I really like In a Grove and Startups. In a Grove is a weird little deduction game where you have 3 guys standing over a body, and you have these little tiny cardboard stylistic abstract figures, and you have some idea about who didn't do it. and collectively the cards and information you have will tell you who did it. And so you're basically having to guess and vote on who did it. Startups is a kind of a game that's a little like No Thanks, which may not mean anything to most of you, but it's a simple,
It's a game, right?
It's a card game.
I'm familiar with that one.
Where you basically can take a card or put a chip on it, and of course, chips are points. With startups, you're trying to collect sets of cards from various startup companies. They have different numbers of cards, and the big idea is that you have to have the most of a type of card that you collect in front of you. Otherwise, if you don't have the most, you end up paying one chip to the person who does have the most at the end of the game. And some of those cards are in your hand, so they're not visible. So you don't know until the last part of the game. The nice thing about Wink is that their games are 30 minutes tops. There's a lot of betting, uncertainty. They're really clever games, which play a decent number of people. And they're generally high quality. They're also in these, I mean, they're smaller than my iPhone, really. They're tiny, tiny little boxes. They're great games.
All right, let me see here. All right, man. Thanks so much, Frank. I appreciate you coming on. I always learn new things anytime I do these little these podcasts, man. I've learned a great deal, and I'm going to be interested in like looking up some German games now and some of the other ones that you had mentioned. So,
Japanese games are actually pretty easy to find now. There's a really thriving Tokyo game market culture. And so I've started looking more avidly to that for the style of games, the play, and everything. And so those are the ones that hit the table a lot of more recent games.
Are you familiar, and you probably are, with the Association of Games and Puzzles? Have you ever done anything for them?
No. Was that Bruce Whitehill and crew?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I do know Bruce. I played many a game with him and chatted with him. I haven't really done much with them. But yeah, he's I do keep his books on the bookshelf, and occasionally we've gone over games or discussed things. But it's been a while since I've seen him.
Yeah. Hopefully I'll have them back on again soon. I love talking with them. They were great.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so guys, we are going to wrap it up. Frank, thank you so much for joining me today.
Okay, sure thing.
Frank, I would just tell y'all he has a podcast, so Ascent of BoardGames.com, and I'm going to put the link under here. So if you guys want to check it out and join in or whatever, please feel free. Frank, great talking to you. Fellow game boarder. He has designed games. I love the. Yeah, what were some of the games that you designed one more time that you can buy now?
So really, I think you can still. I mean, you can probably get 4 Dragons, just on the used market. Really, I don't think there's Dia de los Muertos, which is a light trick-taking game, themed from a Mexican holiday, which is coincidentally our wedding anniversary. You can also Battle Beyond Space. Has a very old school Milton Bradley 80s feel to it. That was really what I was going for that game, because that's that's my childhood. It's kind of I designed it kind of an advanced version of Carrier Strike.
Yeah,
because Carrier Strike is so good, and I have met Michael Gray, the designer of all the tank battle Carrier Strike, and I'm just afraid to talk to him because his games were my childhood. So. So yeah, but he worship going there.
Man. Well, Frank, thank you so much, man. It was a great pleasure meeting you, and hopefully we'll get to do this again sometime in the future.
Sure thing. You get a bunch of questions. I can play show and tell forever. So
yeah, definitely. I'd love to see some more of your games. We'll do another one of these soon, someday. But take care of yourself, and thanks again, everybody, for joining in. And it's been a pleasure, Frank.
Okay. Good luck. And
thank you so much. Everybody, take care. We'll see you next time.